The story of the Texas Republic, the Mexican-American War, and the Mexican Secession began in September of 1821 when Mexico gained its independence from Spain. The new nation needed people to populate its sparsely populated areas. Mexico enticed settlers to come to Texas, and soon a sizable amount of people moved into Texas. Mexico would become wary of the huge amount of immigrants coming from the United States, and they would act against further immigration, reinstating tariffs. This angered the Texans, but this would not be the only conflict between the Mexicans and the Texans. They also brought slaves over, something that was illegal in Mexico. These tensions would culminate by 1836, with Texas declaring independence from Mexico. An important factor was Mexico ripping up its own constitution. The war would not last very long, ending the same year it started, and Mexico refused to acknowledge Texan independence. The same year that Texas declared independence, it applied for annexation, showing that there was a push for Texas to be annexed into the United States. However, it was rejected because the admission of a new state would cause an imbalance between free and slave states. Thus, the Republic of Texas was born. The newly formed country placed its border at the Rio Grande. The Republic of Texas had to deal with land disputes, financial problems, and trying to get recognition from other countries. By the 1840s, annexation talks between Texas and the United States were beginning to take place. However, Texans were rather hesitant to pursue annexation. If the ratification of such a treaty were to be stalled in the U.S. Senate, Mexico could launch a full-scale war on Texas alone. And because Congress had the authority to declare war, Texas would likely have to face this alone. Nevertheless, talks would continue and a treaty would be made that was ultimately shot down. Annexation would stall in Congress until June of 1845 when Texas was annexed. However, the annexation of Texas would lead to a war with Mexico. Mexico would cut ties with the U.S. shortly after Texas was annexed. Additionally, there was now a disputed border as Texas put its border at the Rio Grande, while Mexico put it at the Nueces. President James K. Polk would send John Slidell on a mission to Mexico City to settle the disputed border, settle claims against Mexico, and even buy California and New Mexico. However, the Mexican president refused to see him. Once Polk heard of this, he would send troops over to the disputed territory, creating the perfect setup for a war. Once Mexican soldiers attacked, the stage was set and Polk had his excuse. This declaration of war was overwhelmingly approved, but the population was divided over this war. Democrats favored this, while Whigs saw this as a land grab against a weaker neighbor. The Whigs would challenge President Polk's claim that the fight between U.S. and Mexican troops had begun in U.S. territory. A notable challenge would come from then-member of the House of Representatives, Abraham Lincoln. Abolitionists would see this as an attempt to carve new slave states out of Mexican territory, and a way for slave states to increase their power. The U.S. would send its armies from the Rio Grande to reach the heartland of Mexico, and a second group would take New Mexico and California. The group that was sent to take New Mexico and California would encounter little resistance, a stark contrast to the group that was led by General Zachary Taylor, who would encounter a significant amount of fighting south of the Rio Grande. Additionally, he would show little to no enthusiasm for this invasion and oftentimes didn't pursue Mexican forces after defeating them. Due to this, Polk would send another army, led by General Winfield Scott, to take the city of Veracruz by sea and march towards Mexico City. This plan was noted by victory after victory, taking the city of Veracruz after a 3-week siege and entering Mexico City on September 14, 1847. On February 2, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. Mexico would cede a massive portion of its territory to the U.S. This territory would comprise the modern-day states of Arizona, California, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, and Utah for a mere $15 million. The reason that the U.S. didn't take all of Mexico, which was possible due to their favorable position, was that they didn't want to take millions of Mexicans into the U.S. In a nutshell, racism. The territory that Mexico would cede to the U.S. would reignite the issue of slavery that had been largely settled thanks to the Missouri Compromise. This massive chunk of new territory had the potential to either organize into slave or free states. Additionally, the acquisition of California sparked the gold rush, which brought an enormous amount of wealth over and led to its statehood. The large addition of territory would contribute to manifest destiny, as the U.S. would now stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This additional territory will allow for the creation of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was one of the greatest feats of engineering in the 19th century. Before this land was even gained, Congress was debating on how to organize any land that may have been acquired. One of these proposals was the Wilmot Proviso, which would have prohibited slavery in any territory that might have been gained. The Wilmot Proviso would ultimately fail, and the issue of how to organize all this land was getting increasingly urgent. The addition of California would come with the Compromise of 1850, which would manage to settle these glaring and pressing issues for now. A major consequence of these debates was the erosion of party alliances, as Democrats and Whigs alike would experience infighting within their party. The biggest losers were likely the Native Americans. They were not protected by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. They found themselves having their lands stolen away, hunted down, and exterminated, in a process that became all too familiar throughout the Mexican Secession, and notably in California. Mexican settlers were also not safe from having their land taken. They had to prove that they owned the land by presenting documents that they oftentimes didn't have. In conclusion, the Mexican Secession raised the issue of slavery and led to the horrific extermination of countless Native Americans. It also spurred the California Gold Rush, which brought immense wealth to California.